Hi and welcome to BizToday. I am Nazreen Ibrahim. BizToday is your weekly business show that showcases successful entrepreneurs to inspire you. We take a look at the latest business trends and take key learnings from them so that we can build our own businesses. And then we take a look at the business diary for the week so that you can get going and networking. Our lineup for this week, we've got successful entrepreneur Mohammed Sidat of SmartTrack in studio. Remember also that July is the month of funding. So our focus is on funding on the business, on BizToday. We'll be talking to Yunus Parak, National Marketing Manager for Al Baraka Bank, and exploring the different types of business models they have. And then of course, we take a look at the business events coming up for the week. Our successful entrepreneur on BizToday is Mohammed Sidat. He's the founder and CEO at SmartTrack, has a 15-year career in finance and accounting world. His specialities: business, entrepreneurship, training, internal control systems, and back office process optimization. Mohammed's career has seen him work across corporates in South Africa and abroad, and he's highly respected by his peers and team. He also has a very keen interest in startup and entrepreneurship. Welcome to BizToday, Mohammed.
Jazakallah, thank you.
It's wonderful to have you on the show. You know, I've seen you at a couple of events now. You've been very interested or part of the startup scene here in Durban particularly, but you also have a very rather interesting history and career behind you. And you're one of the people that I've got to say has been inspiring me of late recently, because I always look to people who are building, and they're building with people around them. And that's so key and that's so important. Collaboration, we were just talking about that.
100% right.
So my first question to you is, you know, you've got this 15-year career now in number crunching. How did that journey start?
I think I always knew I wanted to be an accountant. So when at school and embracing accounting as a subject and business economics at that point in time, I always had a flair, I think, for accounting.
Yeah.
So I think you get two people in the world, people who either get accounting or don't get accounting. And if you do, you love it, and if you don't, you hate it. And I always loved it. I also saw it as an entry into the business world.
Yeah.
And I was always interested in the business world and how business worked, etc., etc.
Did you come from an entrepreneurial background, or was it just something that fired in you?
I think it was just something that fired in me. It was something that fired in me, and I knew two things in life, and I often tell the story. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
But I also knew I wanted to be an accountant. And shukar alhamdulillah, if I look back from that aim and goal at that point in time at a fairly young age to where I am today, I think I've embraced both of those and have kind of nurtured my passion for both entrepreneurship and accounting, or the business world. So how I knew I was an entrepreneur was I was always looking for a way to make money at school. So whether it was selling cricket tickets on the black market, or
good way to start,
or running a tuck shop at school which rivaled the school tuck shop.
What did you sell at rival the school tuck shop?
Oh, I sold chocolates and chips and ice lollies and whatever I could to make money. So I always knew that I had a passion for to be an entrepreneur, and then obviously to be an accountant as well.
And so it's fortunate that those have just gelled so well together to be able to
They have,
flourish.
But if you ask me now when last I did accounting work per se, it's probably a long time ago. But I think the strong foundation that I had allows me to do what I do, and to be able to consult to businesses, and to be able to see weaknesses in businesses or strengths in certain businesses, or have a vision of opportunity, which you often need as an entrepreneur to almost look into the future and see what's coming and prepare for it.
So of course that makes me think now about your education journey and what brought you to. So how did it help you in business? If you can give us a bit of insight so we understand exactly, because we're going to talk about this a bit later,
No
the
problem.
debate about higher education and whether it's necessary for entrepreneurship. But what was your education background?
My background was I went to school in Durban, and then I was obviously in matric preparing to go to university, and it was fairly straightforward. I would probably have gone and done a Bachelor of Commerce and then gone the accounting route. But it was very interesting. In my matric year, a firm of accountants came to our school to present. It was a firm at that point in time called David Strachen and Taylor, which is now PKF today.
Okay.
And they came and they presented to us, and I knew there was a loophole and there was a gap. And I think as an entrepreneur, you always kind of find the gap. Is you could do your article straight out of matric. The big four accounting firms had closed that loophole, but the second tier, which David Strachan and Taylor or DSNT was, even though they were the second biggest in KZN at the time. So I asked the question, I put my hand up, and I think that's something that I've always learned is ask a question, even if it makes you look a bit bad or stupid. If it's going to contribute to your learning, then ask the question. So I put up my hand, I asked the question, I said, listen, do you take people straight out of matric? And they said, no, we probably took someone about 5 or 6 years ago, but we don't really encourage it because to work and study at the same time is hard. So I said, okay, but would you take an application in? And they said, yes, I mean, we'll take an application. So I got everything together and I sent an application in to start my articles the next year. And I got called into an interview with a partner at the firm and the HR person.
Right.
And they said, after a while, they came back to me and they said, listen, we will allow you to join, but you need to get certain final matric marks. And shukar alhamdulillah, I achieved those. So I started working and doing my articles at the age of 18, and I didn't even have my driver's license.
You started doing your articles at the age of 18? At
the age of 18. So all my peers were kind of 22, 23 at least, just because they had gone to university, and I started with them. And I think that was a great experience. That just leapfrogged me.
Of course.
A lot of people say, listen, you've been working for 15 years. I've actually been working a lot longer.
But I absolutely really will hook on to what you said there about putting your hand up and asking that question, because how important is that to be able to, number one, project a certain kind of confidence, but also to participate in something you have no idea of,
correct,
but to show a certain enthusiasm so that that's identified and someone who's influential could hook onto that.
100% right. Because people pick up energy. When I recruit now, I look for energy. You can teach a person's skill. So I look for two things. I look for energy and attitude. Because everything else can be taught or learned.
Of course. And I like that you say that also, because I think a lot of emphasis in the standard education system is placed on the fact that it's talent and it's skill and it's mindset, which is, of course, all critical key points for you to be able to progress. But I think when I'm also recruiting, I look for passion and the ability or potential to learn. And I think that's what the energy would be like. So now it brings me to my next question. And I'm thinking, looking through your very impressive resume, you worked at one of the big four in terms of accountancy. What was that experience like in helping you to shape your career path? Because people are very excited when they get into one of the big four.
I think it defined me. So I had to think a little bit about my answer. I think it defined me a lot. Defined me in terms of what I wanted and what I didn't want.
Right.
So essentially what happened at my time at that firm, and I had 2 stints at that firm. The first was in an internal audit kind of role, and then I got headhunted out of the firm into industry as a CFO, and then I got asked to come back to the firm. When I came back, I thought, listen, I could make a career of this as a partner or a managing partner of a firm like this. That would have been my aspiration. Until one day I got involved in the corporate politics of the firm, or was promised something that I wasn't delivered. I was promised a promotion that I wasn't delivered. And the second part of it, and what defined me, was that one of my partners, one of my bosses one day was screamed and shouted at by a partner from Joburg. And I had always revered partners and said, listen, you've reached a certain level in your life. You're an owner now, you're an equity holder. You should demand a certain level, or command rather, a certain level of respect. And I think that day I decided that I would never want to be an employee. And even a highly paid employee, partners at these firms had gone to a stage where you weren't really an owner. You were just a glorified employee. And I've got very hard attitudes in regard to this. So when I saw this happen and I was passed over for promotion that I was promised, I said, listen, it's no longer good enough just to pass my time here. And that's when I got on a plane and I went to London, and I spent a couple of years in London. But I could have stayed on the partnership track, and I probably would be a partner today at that firm.
Right.
But it was not really what I wanted. And I went into an appointment the other day, and a guy asked me about my history, very similar to what you asked me. And he says, but you could have been a partner at a big 4 audit firm. And I said, but I'm in a much better place. And a lot of people don't understand that. It's certain personalities that would go in a certain direction and certain other personalities who wouldn't.
But this is it, right? I mean, you witnessed this incident where one person disrespected the other person.
Correct.
And that, I think, is at the very base
The core.
of who we are and what we want to do as entrepreneurs, because the ultimate is to be able to inspire other people, build a legacy, and make sure that you bring out the greatness in others.
Exactly.
And so I also experienced that at one stage, and it breaks you inside to a
Correct.
point. So it makes me think that your entrepreneurial spirit was already flaming inside, but you said to yourself at that point, okay, there's something's got to give. So in your all the previous career opportunities that you've had as an employee, did you find that it helped you to exercise some of your entrepreneurial spirit at that stage?
I think the journey that I went through, having worked in the corporate world for probably 9 or 10 years before going out on my own, I think it shaped where I am today, and I'm all the better for it.
So you were able to exercise your entrepreneurial spirit as an employee?
Not really. So during articles, I had to keep my entrepreneurial spirit alive, and probably my pocket alive because of what you earn in articles by having my own businesses. So I had franchise takeaways, food delivery businesses. I ran businesses, and that kept my spirit alive. But the corporate world can break your entrepreneurial spirit. I promise you it can. And what you are taught to and how you are taught to think as an employee is very different to an employer. And it comes down to risk and how much risk you prepare to take. So the very successful entrepreneurs know how to take risk and manage their risk. An accountant or a typical corporate employee would look at an opportunity and look for every reason why the opportunity wouldn't work or couldn't work. And I think after coming out of the corporate world, it took me kind of 2 years, and I think it was nice being in London at that point in time to kind of really back myself. And I think that's what it comes down to as an entrepreneur. It comes down to backing yourself. So even if everyone you speak to says that it's an extremely bad idea, but you feel and you back yourself that it's a good idea, you will make it happen.
Yeah.
Because it's not about the idea in entrepreneurship, it's about execution and commitment to execution.
That's right. So I'm just wondering now, listening to you saying that at the point you went abroad, you were still an employee at the stage, but the international exposure helped to build your confidence enough to say, I am able to do this, and nobody will say that it won't work.
I think going to London, I always knew I wanted to come back.
Yeah.
So that was a given. I always knew I wanted to go into something on my own when I did do that. But I was looking for as much experience and exposure as possible, because when you leave the corporate world, there's very little chance you're going to go back. So I wanted to pack in as much as possible in that 2 years that I was overseas. So I learned how the world worked. Often we are insular in South Africa. We think that this is the whole world. But when you look at trends and overseas trends and you can kind of, business is not an art too much as it is a science. So I was reading an article while I was waiting for this interview on co-working spaces, because that's our next big project that we're going into. And kind of the trends that emerged in America 2 or 3 years ago haven't even hit the country yet. So if you just want to look for business ideas, and people often say, what am I going to do as an entrepreneur? It's just to go and observe and travel and look at what's happening overseas or offshore, and you'll see what's going to happen or hit us soon. So people say that we are, in inverted commas, backward at a point, but that's an advantage for people looking for opportunity.
It is, especially in an economy like ours and the diversity of what we have around us.
100%.
So
right.
you went abroad, you said you knew in your mind you were going to come back, but at which point did you say, I now want to own my time?
I think it was circumstance at the time. I had seen friends of mine, and this often happens to people when they emigrate or live overseas for a while. There's a point at which you cannot come back, right, because you're too entrenched in that arena or world of living or lifestyle. And I didn't want to get into that kind of zone, because it would have made it harder. So a lot of my friends, for example, overseas, want to come back. They love South Africa, but they're so entrenched in their lifestyle and their children in schools or their work or their business overseas that they can't actually extricate themselves to come back. So I didn't want to get into that zone. Not that mine is any better than theirs or theirs is any better than mine. It was just a choice of mine. And I wanted to be young enough that I could have the energy to push business on my own, because it's not easy. I don't know when these will end, but I still work 16 to 18 hour days. And you need the energy for that, because I don't think in 10 years time I won't be able to do exactly the same thing.
Of course. You feel the level of commitment that you have is, I think it would be better supported, and you'd feel much easier knowing you're in an environment that you grew up in, or that nurtured you. So I can understand why you said you wanted to come back and be able to establish something, and also in a way give back to the place that you came from.
I think, and I must be honest, it wasn't, now it's at a point where I'm giving back and I'd like to give back, but at that point it was extremely selfish, and I must be truthful about it. Sure. It was that I need to make this happen. With Allah Ta'ala's help, I need to make it happen on my own, and I will do what it takes to make it happen. And that I mean, when I started off, it was me and my laptop, doing all the work at night and going out and seeing clients during the day.
That sounds pretty much like the drill. I know that drill.
And you often try and explain that to a person who's been in the corporate world and they can't understand it. So I've had employees and partners join me in my business, or some of our business units, and they've come from the corporate world, and you see them kind of getting restless at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, because they're used to going home at that point in time, and they're used to coming to the office at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
Whereas I don't have any, which is a good thing and a bad thing, I don't have any stop and go. In terms of when I wake up in the morning, I start working, and when I go to sleep, I finish working.
But you're living and breathing your dream, so
yes,
that's one of the qualities of an entrepreneur, right? But we won't talk about the qualities now. We're going to explore that a bit more. I want to know more about your current business, Smart Track. We've explored your early life, your education, and what brought you to the point where you said, I'm going to own my time. And I feel very much that you had been building the mindset, and that's critical. You know, every entrepreneur will suddenly wake up and switch on and say, I've got to do something that's going to show greatness. So tell us a bit more about Smart Track.
I think what I had identified, and this was critical, you asked me about my time at the Big Four accounting firm.
Yeah.
There was a big learning curve that I went through there, because it was the first time in the history of the professional services world that non-assurance or non-audit revenue was overtaking audit revenue. So what that meant was that services like consulting and recruitment and back office strategies and optimizations and processing and accounting had overtaken audit, which was huge. It was a milestone. And today, audit firms and accounting firms make far more money off non-audit services than they do audit services. So that always was in my mind, and as you say, whether I was focusing on it or not, I was preparing mentally for this stage. So what I identified in the market when I started Smart Track was that businesses needed advice. The Big Four were catering to the mega corporate companies of this world. There was a whole gap below that of businesses that needed advice and needed consulting and needed to know what to do with their businesses, needed processes and systems and controls. And I identified this and I said, listen, that's where I want to target. So I started the business primarily as a strategy and management consulting company. And I would go into businesses and I would give them advice, and I would give them tangible advice. So if they were spending R1 with me, then they were making 10 Rand. And this was a revelation to them, because previously they used to pay audit fees for 100 or 200,000 Rand, or even less than that, and they would never get any value out of it. Now they were paying someone for advice and they were getting 10, 20, 50 times the value. My very first client has grown 5 times in the last 6 years that I've been consulting with them. Number one, that's with Allah Ta'ala's help. But number two is just by putting into place stuff that I've seen elsewhere, or that I read up on, or that's best practice in the world.
Yeah.
And shukar alhamdulillah, it worked from there, and I started getting a second client and the third client, and people started asking for more and more services. So I started accounting and I started tax. And then we had our clients were asking us for a Joburg office, and we started a Joburg office, and I now had a few staff working for me.
Incredible.
And then we started buying other firms. And within a space of kind of a year, we did 5 acquisitions of three accounting firms, a training company, and a media and marketing company in Joburg.
It's almost like you've evolved the company in a way, from just providing certain strategic services. You went to
100%
acquisition.
right, but I'll tell you what way it came through. It was a 10,000 hour rule. It was, and I can't remember offhand the guy who, it was Malcolm Gladwell who said that, is you need to concentrate on something for 10,000 hours, and then you'll get to a breaking point.
Absolutely.
Where things will erupt.
Yes.
And that's exactly what happened to me. So if I can say that the time I started the business to the time I started making acquisitions was roughly 10,000 hours. So I made all these acquisitions, and some of them were good acquisitions, and some of them were decent acquisitions, and some of them were bad acquisitions. And I must be honest and say that, because people often see the success, but they...
If I see you in an upcoming Dragon's Den type show, then I'll know very much so the kind of background that comes with that, right?
Yeah, and it's not only... People often say this, I've lived through it, is you better off after the bad decisions you make, or after the unsuccessful decisions you make. Yeah. It's school fees for an experience. It's not that you failed. And people often see success, and they see successful people or allegedly successful people, and they judge them by their good bets. They never judged by how many times they've failed. They failed and they messed up.
That's not sort of a kind of marker by which you will measure success in somebody, which is absolutely the other way around, right?
Correct. I mean, in America, failure is revered. People go through failure before they get to success. So, for example, banks in America, if you've defaulted or one of your businesses has gone belly up, you can still borrow money from the bank in America. In South Africa, it's almost unheard of.
Of course, that's
so.
Absolutely
What kind
right.
of culture are we inculcating if we are celebrating failure or failure before success? So that person never gets to that point.
And talking about failure, I mean, every startup knows that they run a risk of failure.
Correct.
Until they put in those 10,000 hours, as we've spoken about. And I've noticed that you have quite a few young startups as well as emerging entrepreneurs under your wing. Would you explain that and what's happening in the business at the moment?
Psychology. So it's an interesting psychology. What I did the calculation was is we grew nationally, and we started doing a bit of international work with our acquisitions, and I realized that after I had looked at the acquisitions carefully, I realized that I could start these own businesses on my own. So I needed those acquisitions to give me economies of scale and to give me a brand and clout within the market. But I realized that I could start these businesses much cheaper on my own. And if you ask me after my acquisitions, would I have shared equity with anyone, I would have told you no. So a lot of people asked me about my growth strategy, and I said that I will be the owner. And that was my view. Until I started looking at an employee-employer mindset and what drives employees or what drives people, and understanding psychology. And I realized that to grow my business, in individual units, I would have to give away equity. Yeah. So what I started looking for was individuals within or external of my organization who I saw potential in. So a mentor of mine says that you need to spend 2 hours a day on talent management. So you need to spend 2 hours a day on interacting with your staff, on finding new staff, on finding new people, because ultimately people drive your organization.
That's right.
And I started looking, and the first business that I backed was employee number 5 of mine. And he came to me one day and he says, listen, I want to go out on my own. I appreciate everything you've done. And I said, listen, let's sit down. What do you want to do? And he told me what he wanted to do. So I said, listen, I will go into partnership with you. So we'll create a different business, a different brand. You can operate from wherever you want. You will be the MD of that business. And we'll both take shareholding in that business. And to start you off, I'll give you a chunk of my business.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I did. And that's an ultra successful business. It's 1 year later, it's an ultra successful business today. The second business was a legal compliance business. I had found an individual who I felt had a great amount of talent working within the corporate world.
Sure.
I pulled him out. I said, listen, this is what it is. He's working extremely hard at it at the moment, and it will be a very, very successful business.
Mohammed, you sound a lot like James Khan. I know that's his very key strategy. He's one of my icons, so we got to explore that some other time. But we're slowly but surely wrapping up what's a rather interesting conversation.
Okay.
I mean, it's always inspiring to sit and talk to an entrepreneur who's focused, determined, and doing something great. So what are your top qualities for a successful entrepreneur, or that defines an entrepreneur?
I think number one is decisiveness. So if I ask myself at the end of the day, how many decisions have you made today? Or how many hard decisions have you made today? I think that's definitive of an entrepreneur. I think so the opposite is you cannot procrastinate on anything.
Yes.
So I've learned, and I was a very bad procrastinator. I still possibly am a bad procrastinator, but if you can improve on that daily and say, listen, you need to do the stuff that you need to do today and not hold it off until tomorrow. And I'm bad at that. I still am bad at that, because I think you can continually improve that. So if you make hard decisions, you don't procrastinate. And I think the biggest thing is backing yourself and pushing through, because there's a pain barrier. And there's a quote that goes along the lines of starting is easy, the middle is extremely messy, and finishing is hard. And that's exactly what you go through every day. I would like to start hundreds of businesses, and it's part of my plan to start hundreds of businesses, inshallah. But you have to go through that with all these. And we often say, listen, we find ourselves in a comfort zone. And as Muslims, we often say, you know, I have enough, so should I go further? But it's not about the money. It's not about chasing. It's about building legacies. Intense personal development. And other communities have gone out and have done that. And why shouldn't we showcase ourselves as number one, Muslims, and number two, as, you know, allegedly successful entrepreneurs?
Of course.
Yeah.
That you've hit on a very good point there, because I know also with the InTV having launched a new series called Muslink and highlighting successful, influential Muslim entrepreneurs as well as figures in the country. And it makes a lot of sense what you say. Why shouldn't we push ourselves as Muslims? It's not that we're looking at pride or ego or anything, but it's about creating those figures that will inspire others. So a few final words, Mohammed, for aspiring entrepreneurs.
I think you have no option but to be an entrepreneur. You know, you can go through school these days, and we've got an academy of entrepreneurship, which I haven't spoken about, but where we feel that children need entrepreneurial skills at a school level, because when you leave school, you're not guaranteed of university access.
Absolutely.
We look at the riots. I mean, I shouldn't laugh, but I look at it every year where at Wits University, there's a million people trying to get into 100,000 places. So you finish school, you have no guarantee of university. Then you go to university and you have no guarantee of getting a job.
Right.
So my advice is you have to be an entrepreneur. There's no other way. You can go into the corporate world and have your kind of earning ceiling,
your 9 to 5 security.
Your 9 to 5 security, and you'll earn money, but it may never be millions or billions. And it's not about the money. It's about the challenge, number one, and using the money as a measure of success. Nothing else. Yeah.
Wonderful. It's just such a pleasure to have you on Biz today.
Thank you for having me.
I think we can only take away the best of the lessons from your experience, and I really hope you're able to come back and speak with us about your future plans.
Inshallah.
That was Mohammed Sidat, our successful entrepreneur for this week on Biz Today. Next, we'll be speaking with someone about funding. That's Al Baraka Bank, and Yusuf Farooq will be talking to us about the types of funding models that they have. Stay tuned. We'll be back.